This week in the astrology, we have quite a bit going on. Almost every single day has a highlight to talk about. And this week, we get the new moon in Cancer as well as the Jupiter Cazimi. So this week is kind of really sensitive, kind of low energy, but there is a lucky day this week. And let me just list off all of the transits that we've got going on. We have the sun making a square to Neptune. We have the Jupiter Cazimi on Tuesday. We have the new moon in Cancer on Wednesday. We'll have Mercury make a sextile to Uranus. We'll have Mercury go into Leo. We're then going to have Mercury make a trine to both Saturn and then Neptune. And then by the end of the week, we will have Mercury entering shadow very late Sunday night. Now, I know this is a lot of highlights. It sounds like it's a big deal. It's not really the biggest deal. This isn't the biggest week of the year. However, it is really sensitive. And this week does have quite a bit of, highlights to talk about. So let's just go ahead and get started talking about it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. This is for June 23rd through June 29th of 2025. I'm very excited you guys can be here with me today. There is quite a bit to go over this week. So let's just go ahead and get into it. So we're starting Monday off with the sun first making a square to Neptune really early in the morning, as well as the moon in Gemini making a square to Mars really early in the morning. The moon entered Gemini really late Sunday night. And so when the moon's in Gemini, you're a little bit talkative, you're a little bit inquisitive. And as the moon makes that square to Mars in Virgo, where Mars in Virgo wants a little bit more precision, a little bit more accuracy. The thing I kind of wrote down was like an early morning wake up disturbance. This happens at I think 3 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you're over in the East Coast, you might wake up to a loud neighbor or a loud car or something along those lines. It's a little bit frustrating. But for the highlight of the day, we have the sun making a square to Neptune. And as the sun makes a square to Neptune, this is not necessarily the biggest deal. I talked last week about the sun making a square to Saturn, and that's when, Saturn's kind of the realization of what Saturn and Aries really is about, right? It's that first quarter pivot of all right, here's the Saturn stuff. Are you going to be able to handle it? The sun squaring Neptune is kind of somewhat similar, but sometimes it's hard to delineate the differences between, okay, well, what is a transit to, just Neptune versus just Saturn? Like Saturn and Neptune being so close to one another, they're kind of really blended together. And in fact, that's something that actually Neptune does really well. I think as the sun just squares Neptune, there's kind of this disturbance, and maybe disturbance is a little bit of a hardcore word to use, of what your pride, your vitality, your willpower is trying to do. But Neptune in Aries is distorting kind of again, we have these ideals of what we can do, this ideal of what we want to do. And the sun, and being in Cancers, there's this friction with that. There's this okay, well, this is what I have the willpower to do right now, and it's not really lining up with the visual I had. So I think Monday just kind of starts off somewhat frustrating, to be honest with you. But that brings us to Tuesday, and pretty much all day on Tuesday, the moon is just hanging out in Gemini, and it won't ingress into Cancer until really late at night, like 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the moon ingresses into Cancer. But we have our next highlight of the week, which is the Jupiter Cazimi. And now you're going to see I don't know what the title of this video is going to be. It might be like the luckiest day of the year, and I put that in quotes for a reason. And you'll see a lot of astrologers, at least online astrologers, social media people kind of talk about that the Jupiter Cazimi is like the luckiest day ever. And what's really interesting is I watched a video from Ryan Butler over at Medieval Astrology Guide. If you guys don't know him, you need to watch him. He's a great astrologer, good friend of mine. And he made this video about the idea of a planet being in its chariot. If you're not familiar with this idea, let's say the sun is going to be in Scorpio and Mars is in Scorpio, right? What astrologers would call that is, well, that planet is in its chariot. And even though it's combust, which means that planet is really close to the sun, the negative effects of combustion don't apply because, well, it's in its own sign. And Ryan Butler just made a really good point about, well, that doesn't really make sense because the whole point of the sun conjoining a planet is it's resetting its synodic cycle. And so over the past, let's say 10-ish days, maybe 15 days, Jupiter has been both under the beams of the sun and combust. And what this means in traditional astrology is that a planet is dying during that point where the sun is making its conjunction towards it, when the sun is heading towards that planet, or when a planet is heading towards the sun, depending on what planet it is. And when that planet conjoins the sun, or when the sun conjoins the planet, that is the official death and rebirth of that planet. So Jupiter, in other words, has been kind of dying over the past week or two. It's both been in Gemini, where it's just been not functional. And then as it moved into Cancer and the sun got closer, it's been dying. It's been, not operating at the way that it's supposed to be. When you have the sun conjoin Jupiter and you have that Jupiter cazimi, that's when that planet is in the heart of the sun. And that's when it's its most pure. It's when it's its most active. It's kind of like the idea of, you could say that it's the death of a planet or the birth of a planet. So for example, you're in labor, you give birth to a baby, that moment it's out, that's the cazimi moment essentially. And I bring this up because now that we're going into this phase of the rebirth of Jupiter, it will take about a week or two for the sun to really leave that conjunction with Jupiter and for Jupiter to get out of the beams, for Jupiter to get out of combustion. And that's when we'll start to see more and more of Jupiter in Cancer and how it's operating in our lives. And up until this point, we don't really have that. And so there's something about Tuesday about the story of what Jupiter in Cancer is going to be for us is resetting. This might be more information that you get depending on where Jupiter's transiting in your chart, in that area of your chart, in that area of your life, receiving some sort of information that makes things really clear about what is going to be happening next. Same thing too, feeling more hopeful, feeling more positive that it is happening. And again, think about, a newborn birth. It's like really exciting probably when it first happens. I'm not a dad, I don't know. It's probably really exciting, but then, if you give birth at a hospital, it's like, they take the baby, it's like all this stuff that goes around. It takes kind of a minute to really relax and kind of calm down and bring your baby back to the house and, to do that whole thing. That's kind of what is going on in the astrology with Jupiter. But this is kind of the moment that Jupiter really kind of comes alive. So it might take some time to really see it play out, but there is something really special about Tuesday of maybe feeling more hopeful, feeling like something has shifted, feeling like something has actually changed. And again, just look at what house Cancer rules in your chart. That's going to show you where more of your opportunities, more of your abundance, more faith is going to be happening. And if you haven't watched my Jupiter in Cancer video yet, you should, because I go over what it's going to be looking like for you guys. But then, like I said, late night on Tuesday, the moon will ingress into Cancer and we get this like late night sensitivity. And that brings us to Wednesday, where really early Wednesday morning, so like the moon goes into Cancer, then like an hour or two later, the moon is then first going to make a square to Saturn, then it's going to make a square to Neptune, then the moon will conjoin Jupiter, and then we actually have the new moon in Cancer. That all happens within a period about 2 or 3 hours, first thing in Wednesday morning. This week is really funny. All of the transits, like all of the events happen at like 10 p.m. or like 3 a.m. So it's kind of like you're not going to really see it that much in the day, but more so like going from one day to the other during your sleep. So the moon making that square to Saturn and Neptune, most of us are going to be asleep, but there's this kind of like early morning feeling like there's a new beginning happening. And as the moon goes into Cancer and squares Saturn and squares Neptune during this new moon phase, there's kind of the same feeling around, okay, what are the things that I'm responsible over? How heavy are they? How restrictive are they? And as everything's in Cancer, where there's now about this protection, this nurturing, this sort of sensitivity, there's going to be this frustration with what you must do and how you feel about it. And I think that's going to be kind of hard. Now, when the moon conjoins Jupiter, it's exciting. There's a level of, okay, I can do this. I can take care of these needs. And one of the things I wrote down was prioritizing needs over your ability. And I want to just speak about that for a minute, because I think it's really easy in life to discount what we have as options in our life because of ability. Oh, I can't learn that, or I don't know this, or I don't understand. And a lot of Saturn in Aries is very disabled, if I think is a really good term. And I don't mean that in like a what's the thing, like ableist, where you talk shit about crippled people. What I mean by that is Saturn, if it's about structure and it's about rigidity, it's about discipline, it's about being patient, and it is about restrictiveness, it's like the quality of it is harsher. The quality of it is more difficult to deal with. And so Saturn in Aries can feel as if you do not have the ability. And when everything's going into Cancer, we have this new moon in Cancer. I really want to ask you, but like, it's not really about can you do it, but more so of you need to do it. And I think that's going to be a big clicking point for all of us, where we have to kind of reckon with, hey, it doesn't really matter if I feel like I can't do it, if I feel like I don't have the resources. This is a necessity. If you're like a parent, if you're a good parent, I should say, let's say you don't have the money to feed your kid, you're going to find a way to feed your kid. You're going to figure it out. I mean, again, unless you're a bad parent, but, and that's kind of the energy on Wednesday. Now, this is the new moon that we're having, and this is in Cancer. There's a lot of sensitivity here, and it's Jupiter in Cancer too, where, Jupiter being about faithfulness and hope and opportunity, and Jupiter's exalted, there's all of this support and all these resources, if that makes sense. Like it reminds me, a lot of the Saturn and Aries and Jupiter and Cancer reminds me of, if you are someone who is addicted or homeless, there are so many resources for you to tap into. And this is, again, like a lot of people get mad at me when I'm like, I get frustrated at the homeless situation and it's like, oh, you don't have empathy. It's like, I have so much empathy, but I just don't really think empathy looks like letting people, overdose on fentanyl on the street every single day. But there's things like churches, for example. I've talked a little bit about like my coming back to Christianity, and it's so like a lot of people are like, oh my God, the church is so bad. The church used to be like, if you're someone who is like sick, as in like you are overdosing and you are on the streets, like there are churches that are there to help you. Now you can't do drugs while you're there, but there are so many. And the reason I know this is my family, like my stepdad and my mom, I can't even tell you how much they gave to my local community, how many of their own personal resources they gave to the church to help people. And I've seen it all throughout my life. And I'm bringing this up because Saturn in Aries is like, okay, you may not have the tools to do it yourself. You might actually need help. You might actually need to be taken care of in some sort of a way. And it might be humiliating. It might be humbling, but you have to kind of let yourself take it on. And this is why I brought up the whole phrase of you have to prioritize your needs over your ability. And I think as we have this new moon in Cancer, this is a kind of a sensitive moment where, hey, how does it feel to have a warm meal, to have somewhere to be, to have, I'm speaking more metaphorically at this point of not being cold or abandoned on the streets or something like that. And there is this frustrating part to it, but hey, you've got these needs to prioritize. And there are people in your life that want to take care of you, that want to help you. Hell, you are someone that wants to take care of yourself and that wants to help yourself. And it's just not going to look the way that maybe you want it to look or that you expected it to look. And so as we have this new moon, it's really about kind of just sitting there and understanding, hey, this is what I need to protect. And that might go against, I might not have all of the resources of the time or the energy, but what opportunities do I have in front of me to take on? How can I, just let myself be taken care of in a lot of ways? And I know that sounds strange, but it's just this Cancer Aries, Aries is very like, we need to attack and go forth. And Cancer is like, well, we need to kind of conserve. Like the Capricorn Cancer axis is really interesting in terms of like conserving and prioritizing resources through systems. Like a lot of Capricorn is, hey, like we have to build these systems in order to maintain and to grow and to build. And Cancer is like, well, what necessities are we prioritizing with that? Like the balance of Cancer and Capricorn is like, okay, an employer needs employees, but the employees need healthcare. You know what I mean? And I get it. This country has healthcare, blah blah blah. But like that's kind of the dynamic here. And so when you have Jupiter being in Cancer, there's more access to this kind of stuff. But it's going in the way of, we might have to restrict our actions a little bit. We might have to be more disciplined about our actions, and it may be a little bit more difficult, right? Like you can be taken care of at your local, shelter, but you're not going to be able to do the drugs, and that's going to be hard. That's kind of the idea of this new moon coming in and really just saying, all right, like I'm feeling sensitive, but I need this sort of help. And I know it's going to be difficult, but I know that this is the right thing for me. We get to Thursday. Mercury, while it's at the last degrees of Cancer, is going to make a sextile to Uranus. We have the moon in Cancer making a sextile to Venus. And then later on that evening, Mercury will enter Leo. A lot going on here. Mercury and Cancer making a sextile to Uranus and Taurus. The thing I wrote down was like a last minute quick fix. It's just kind of like, oh, let me just take care of this real quick. I have this idea. Let me just handle this one last time. Yeah, Mercury, people talk about the anaretic degrees and 29 degrees. Maybe one day I'll make a whole video about my opinions about that. But I look at it so much as more of a last minute quick fix. As the moon makes that sextile to Venus, though, and the moon's in Cancer and Venus is in Taurus, this is both of the feminine planets, like in their home signs, connecting with one another. And, I think when it comes to feminine energy and when it comes to receptiveness, when it comes to being more yin, being more internal, this is looking pretty good. And, there's such a imbalance of, I think, people's both masculine energy and feminine energy that they understand for themselves in their own context, right? Like it's going to be different for men than it's going to be for women. And I look at this moon in Cancer sextiling Venus and Taurus as an opportunity to get a little bit more in touch and to refuel that more feminine, that more internal, that more yin part of yourself, and it's just a sextile, and it's just a moon, sextiling Venus transit. It's not something that lasts all day. It's not something that lasts all week. It's just like hey, what can you do that will kind of let you touch on that a little bit and refuel yourself? Like, again, I think about, this is the most American thing I can think of, is there's a difference between how you feel when you go to a shitty gas station or like a really nice gas station. Have you ever been to a really nice gas station? You're like, they got all the drinks, they got all the, refreshments. The bathroom is clean and not gross. There's plenty of shade. You don't have ads popping up on your, stupid screen. That's kind of the idea. But Mercury going into Leo is our last highlight on Thursday. And the thing I was kind of thinking about is, what does it mean to have this really yin, internal, feminine transits going on, right? Then to have Mercury go into Leo. And it really reminds me of the thing I wrote down was like saying it with your chest after making love. Like after you, I feel like the guys here would get it, and I'm sure the woman here would probably understand too. But the idea of when you can kind of touch on that really safety part or that very loving internal part of yourself, there's a level of confidence that comes from that. There's a level of like, man, I feel really good, and now I want to express that. Now I want to put that out into the world because I have it within me. And I think Mercury, again, it's about ideas and logic and the way that you communicate. Now going into Leo, this is something we're going to talk a lot about as we kind of go into Leo season and we start getting all this fire stuff again. We're having this real moment in the seasons in June of being more connected to, being a little bit more sensitive, being connected to our emotions, the more internal part of ourselves. And as we get these transits into Leo, that then turns into having more confidence, being more proud, being a little bit more alive again. And so as Mercury goes into Leo, there's a lot more about saying it with your chest. Your mind is thinking more confidently, more proudly, more kingly, maybe in a way is an easier way to say it. And so I think there's this level of, even Wednesday and Thursday of like, all right, I've got some sensitivity. I was able to feel, taken care of or hugged or having a level of intimacy that now has translated into I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling proud. I'm feeling brave. I'm feeling true. I'm feeling authentic. And I'm able to think that way. And again, for a lot of us, we're not always in control of our thoughts, and our thoughts control our feelings. Our thoughts control our reality. And I think as Mercury goes into Leo, our thoughts are going to be more geared towards that Leo essence, right? Hey, like what is the most authentic, most, visible way, the most fiery, passionate way I could do things? And as our mind goes into that area, yes, Mercury is going to be retrograding there. So there's going to be some delays. This is like the least, I'm going to make a Mercury retrograde video, and it's not going to be like my usual ones because this is like I think a helpful Mercury retrograde. This Mercury retrograde is really not that bad. Like nothing's going on. So we will have delays and a rethinking of this area. But as Mercury just goes into Leo, just being able to like think a little bit more like confidently, like proudly, like, yeah, that felt really good. And now I feel like the man. I feel, a little bit more confident now. So then we get to Friday. And on Friday, the moon also goes into Leo, and then it immediately conjoins Mercury, and then the moon trines Saturn, and then the moon trines Neptune, and then the moon goes opposite Pluto. And later on that evening, we have our next highlight, which is Mercury makes a trine to Saturn. So this is what I was talking about. So we have all this sensitivity and these feelings, and then that translates into this more yang, more like outgoing, passionate energy. And this is on Friday. Like I really like this weekend, to be honest with you guys. I think it's going to be a really good weekend. As the moon goes into Leo and conjoins Mercury, the thing I wrote down was like an early morning, because this also happens like super early in the morning, like 3 or 4 a.m. An early morning confidence for the day. There's something about just waking up on Friday and being like, I'm the shit, I'm the man, I can do this. I'm, feeling visible, I'm feeling seen, I'm feeling like, for example, when I was DJing weddings, my boss had this phrase where when you're a DJ at a wedding, you either make or break the wedding, as in you're the one who can be responsible for making it the best night of their lives, or you could be the one that literally ruins everything and makes their wedding horrible. And we called something called the love tank, which is like you just do these tiny little things that can impress them or make them feel like they have confidence in you. And you just add a little deposit into the love bank. And then by the end of the night, for example, you put so much in there that if you do mess something up, they're not that worried about it because you've already handled so much. And why I bring this up is that kind of love bank or that love tank analogy of, even if things go wrong, you still feel like things are taken care of. And there's been these tiny things that make you feel like, hey, the day is going to go the way that I want to. Things are going the way that I want to. I think as the moon goes into Leo and conjoins Mercury, there's like just this understanding that maybe like that love tank is full. So there's more confidence, there's more clarity, there's more being able to enjoy the moment. And as the moon goes into Leo, again, we're feeling pride, we're feeling confident. Moon conjoins Mercury. Again, this is really early in the morning. So just having something said to you, or someone tells you something, or just even thinking something that makes you feel really damn good. The moon is going to then trine Saturn and Neptune and go opposite Pluto. And the thing I was thinking about with this is the moon's trining Saturn in Aries. So it's like, sweet, locking in, moon's trining Neptune. Awesome. This is going with, right? It's a trine and it's the moon and Leo. Our emotions are aligning in a way that works really well with what our visual is, with what our dreams are in terms of how we take actions, right? So it's feeling good. But the moon goes opposite Pluto a little bit later, but still early in the morning. And the thing I wrote down is just facing demons. The thing I wrote down was facing demons with ease. There's times, and I've talked a lot about the Leo Aquarius axis, and I always think about zodiacal axes in terms of really understanding what zodiac signs mean. And sometimes you have to go out on your own and you have to validate yourself, because, even in a group dynamic, your group is only as strong as your strongest individual in that group. And I think as Pluto is there, again, even in the social media stuff, like, the war stuff with Iran and, the protests, and it's just really easy to be afraid. And it's really easy to be susceptible to that fear. And all of that fear is just driven to divide everybody. And then you get stoked on the anxiety and you kind of doom scroll, or you worry about things that you would have never worried about before if you just weren't made aware of them. And I think as that moon goes into Leo and kind of goes opposite Pluto, I just think a lot about, like, when it comes to facing fear, it has so much more to do with, like, do you have that resiliency? Do you have that confidence? Do you have that trust? Do you have that faith that you can not worry about stuff that maybe there's a righteous, I don't want to say righteous, but there maybe is reason to worry. But does the worrying help you at all? Does the worrying get you anywhere? Like, you can have a shitty situation and be stressed about it, but the more stress, like, the amount of stress that you put into something does not, take away any of the bad part of it. In fact, stressing about it makes it worse. Having fear about it just makes it worse. And so I really look at that moon going opposite Pluto as just allowing an opportunity to have that, like, that confidence and just kind of like, I'm not going to worry about the bullshit. It's just going to be a day that all of the bullshit, all of the fear affects me less. Then we also have the highlight on Friday, which is Mercury trining Saturn. And I really like this because the thing I wrote down was good planning with thoughts, with confidence, with what you must do. And the thing is, with Mercury now in Leo, where we're feeling confident, we're thinking in those terms, and now it's trining Saturn. It's like, cool, now I could plan. Now I can really start dedicating myself to this. Like with Mercury being in Cancer squaring Saturn, it's like, okay, what's the, I need to do this, but I'm afraid of doing it. It's a little bit hard. That Mercury in Leo trining Saturn is like, I have Saturn in Aries trining Mercury in Leo, and I'm like, I can motherfucking do anything. Like, this is, maybe it's too much confidence, but like, I would rather have too much confidence than not enough, to be honest with you. And so as Mercury's making that trine to Saturn, I just think this is a really good day on Friday to just be like, you know what? Now that I'm feeling good, let me take some accountability and let me take some inventory of my own life with this perspective, rather than being like, oh, well, this isn't working out well. How do I, adjust and make things a little bit, how do I play a smaller game? This is more of like, how do we play a bigger game now that you're feeling good? What else can be next? What else can you do? And as Mercury just trines Saturn, there's that level of like connecting our discipline and our habits and our behaviors with our thoughts in a really harmonious way. That brings us to Saturday, early Saturday morning. We will have Mercury make a trine to Neptune, because again, it like trines Saturn late on Saturday night, or my bad, late Friday night, and then it trines Neptune early Saturday morning. And then the moon, while it's in Leo, is going to make a square to Venus. So, when I think about Mercury trine Neptune, the thing I wrote down was getting the propaganda across. And the second part I wrote of that was, you have to brainwash yourself or be brainwashed. And I think this is really important because I've talked a lot about fifth generational warfare, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I have so many videos about the wars that are going to be happening. And it's become difficult to talk about with my audience for a lot of reasons. And the reason, but the way I want to go about this is, the reason I get the propaganda across is, number one, when I think about media and propaganda and what's going on, you can use a lot of what's going on in the world as a proxy for like what's going on in your own life, right? Like again, proxy is, I think, the more appropriate word, where you're not directly involved, but it maybe mirrors in a lot of certain ways. And so I think of Mercury and Leo making that trine to Neptune as, when I say get the propaganda across, and the reason I added brainwash yourself or be brainwashed is there is so much interest in having you guys and having people believe certain narratives, believe certain truths, and to eventually take action on those things. And so when you are, and your brain is always open-minded to these things, right? Like that's why it is important to understand what you're consuming media-wise. But let's talk about brainwashing for a second, because when I think about Mercury and Leo trining Neptune and Aries is, why wouldn't you take the opportunity to rinse your brain in nothing but things that are going to be beneficial to you, in nothing but things that are going to make you feel confident and feel good, and not just validate bad behaviors? What I mean by that is, like, we could be like, okay, well, you don't do anything wrong and everything works out for you. And maybe the not doing anything wrong part doesn't really work, but the everything works out for you. That's not a bad belief to have. And so with Mercury and Leo trining Neptune on Saturday, I think there's a really good opportunity, like Saturday morning, to just kind of sit with, what are you thinking of right now? And it reminds me of a computer where you might have let's say, for example, I work on music, right? And I use FL Studio. It doesn't save my projects automatically, but I'll start doing something. I'm like, wait, I need to save this at this point right here. So I'll save it. That's almost what I want you to do on Saturday, of like, hey, what do you feel like? What are you thinking about? How does it make you feel? Are you feeling more confident, more brave, more like, again, authentic? Let's save this. Let's think about this. Use, again, like, I've been training my algorithm to only give me stuff that is going to, again, like, I don't get anxiety on social media anymore. I get, like, honestly confident when I'm on social media. It makes me more aligned with my purpose because of the things that I'm feeding myself, right? It's not the 80s anymore where you're just given the channels that you're given and you have to watch the programs that you're watching. We now have so much more control over the programs that we're watching. Like, utilize media to help you, like, with your thoughts, with your actions, and staying consistent and staying in line with what your vision and your purpose is. That's what Saturday is good for. And now the other thing is the moon will be in Leo and it squares Venus and Taurus. The thing I wrote down was that attention disrupts pleasure. Like, it almost reminds me of, you're trying to have a nice dinner, a nice evening, and one of your friends just kind of ends up taking all of the attention away and it just disrupts something nice. I think at the end of the day, the moon is making a contact with Venus again. This isn't the worst transit ever, right? Like, it's still a nice dinner. It's still a nice evening. It's just a little like, hey, tone it down a little bit. But the moon squaring Venus is some sort of need for attention or need for validation, might disrupt something that's going on that's related to pleasure or fun. Or it might just add on to the pleasure and the fun with more sparkle and more glitter. Then we get to Sunday. On Sunday, we have Mercury making an opposition to Pluto. I forgot to star that. And then we have the moon making a square to Uranus, and then it's going to ingress into Virgo. And then we have the moon first making a sextile to Jupiter, and then it's going to conjoin Mars. And then by the late evening, Mercury enters shadow. So again, kind of a lot going on this week, but Mercury opposite Pluto, the thing I wrote down was truth to light and information overcoming fear. It's one of those things where it's very difficult to balance out why I've gotten a little bit more into Christianity, because I know everyone gets so triggered by it, and I'm not trying to push it on you guys, but just the reason why is there's been so many things around fear I've dealt with Pluto going opposite my sun. And you get to a certain point where you realize you're not in control of anything. I can't control what might happen to me. I can't control what the future has in store for me that isn't in my control. I can't control every outcome. I can't control every person. I can't control, the only thing I can control is myself and how I react to things. I can't fix or change people. I can only fix and change myself. And the reason I bring this up is, and I've talked a lot about this, I just think fear really is like, and this sounds super Bayou, but like, fear is the devil. And I think about Mercury and Leo going opposite Pluto, of just what information. Like, it's not even like Jupiter, like a faith practice, but just straight up info. Like a Google, you Google something or you read an article online that just makes you think about, because again, this is an opposition, right? Oppositions are like a Mexican standoff. These two things are not working with one another. And that's Mercury and Leo versus opposite Pluto and Aquarius. And Mercury Leo is like, I'm thinking about, about visibility and being seen and confidence and authenticity and being like more of a kingly manner. And I'm working on more words to add on to Leo, but it's in opposition to the fear that society and the information and the tech that is being thrown on me. And the reason I've even talked about this fear stuff is like, there's like, long story short, we're going into a time of war. Next year will really be more obvious. That's why I might make a video about the Iran thing. I just don't really think it's going to be right now, to be honest. The astrology doesn't say that. It says, again, if it is, it's July, but it's more so next year. You don't like, the fear isn't going to help you. It's really not. And we like to be afraid because fear validates something inside of us. It validates that, things aren't going right, or validates why we can't do the things that we want to do because, well, I'm afraid. There's all these things to worry about, Cameron. Why don't you worry about these other things? And fear is a great distraction from actually living your purpose, because you want to live your purpose, but you're afraid of doing that. So you find excuses and reasons. Oh, well, this is happening. And it goes for both sides of the political, aisles too. And so I just think as Mercury goes opposite Pluto, is just using some information to help you overcome that fear. I really think fear is the worst thing that you could ever experience, because oftentimes there's really ever nothing to be afraid about, but it's the feeling that destroys our soul. It's robbing you. A good saying I've heard is fear robs you of the present. Fear robs you of the present moment. And when you take all this time and you waste your life being afraid, you might look back in 10 or 20 years and be like, I wasted time being afraid of things that never happened, or that didn't affect me, or that weren't as big of a deal as I thought they were going to be. And I really want you to take that opportunity to think about that on Sunday. The moon is going to make a square to Uranus and ingress into Virgo. There's a little bit of like, the moon being in Leo, squaring Uranus at like the last degrees is very like, your pride and confidence disrupts something, or there's some sort of disruption that then creates a bit of a critical error. The moon being in Virgo is kind of like, oh no, I should have done this wrong. I should have done this different, and this little thing went wrong, and just kind of really overanalyzing everything that could have happened or things that could have changed. But the moon is then going to make a sextile to Jupiter and conjoin Mars, and the thing I wrote down was feeling like you could feeling like you are taking care of things, but getting overwhelmed. So like the moon in Virgo sextiling Jupiter in Cancer is like, okay, I could do this and I could do that, and I'm going to start taking care of that. But then as the moon conjoins Mars, it's like, there's too much to take care of. There's too many lists. There's too many tasks. There's too many things, and just feeling overwhelmed and stressed about that. So Sunday's kind of an all over the day place. But what's interesting is the last highlight of the week, and I might talk about this more next week, is Mercury enters shadow. And I find it interesting that actually when Mercury stations retrograde is when Mars conjoins the South Node in Virgo. And so, Mars, the planet of fights and conflicts, is conjoining the South Node. There's like this dump, this release, and it's all in Virgo. So it's like your plans, and then Mercury goes retrograde, where what's really interesting to me is Mercury's now in shadow. Context of things are going to start changing there. There's going to start being more delays as Mars is in a Mercury-ruled sign. I just wonder how much of all of this kind of stress and tediousness builds up for us to start letting go of, and to start moving on from, and to start really rethinking about how we go about our thoughts, our ideas, our plans, our logistics, our writing, and our communication style. And so we'll talk about that. I'll have a whole Mercury retrograde video here soon. But next week, Venus conjoins Uranus, Venus moves into Gemini, and we have Neptune stationing retrograde. This past week, the week before this video, and this upcoming week is really like this kind of a sensitive vibe shift. And then as we kind of move forward, we have Venus and Uranus going into Gemini. We have the sun going into Leo, Mercury being in Leo. A lot more fire and air kind of comes back alive. So really enjoy this next week as something to be a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more refueling for the more internal part of yourself. And by this weekend, I think that's going to be able to express a lot more loudly into a more active, more yang energy to kind of continue out through the next couple of weeks. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being here, and I will be seeing you guys next week.